This is episode 32 of the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about learning how to ride a bike. I'm your host and life coach, Danita Bremer. Have you ever received a prompting that you ignored for a long time, like 17 years? This podcast is that for me. I'm telling my stories, I'm learning from my past, and I'm inviting you along for the ride. My intention is that you will find hope, understanding, and community by hearing my story. All right. I had the first experience of recording my last episode and then immediately knowing what I wanted to talk about next, even though it doesn't have anything to do with my last episode. A story popped into my head, and it's something that I think about pretty often. I mean, not constantly, but fairly often throughout my life. And I think it's a metaphor for a pattern that I have in my life. So, as I tell this story, listen for the metaphor and also start thinking about stories that come up in your mind fairly regularly, even though, maybe there's not a reason that they seem triggered. It's just something your brain goes to. And I wonder if those specific stories indicate a pattern in your life. So, as I was thinking about when I learned how to ride a bike, I realized that I don't actually remember specifically about the stuff that happened before I learned how to ride my bike. But I do have this sense that my parents had been teaching me, encouraging me, wanting me to learn how to ride a bike for a couple of years. I don't know, probably it started when I was like 5-ish, but I didn't learn how to ride a bike until I was 7. And the reason is because I have always been like afraid of everything. And I was just too afraid to even try. I think maybe one time my dad tried to teach me and then I freaked out and it didn't last very long and I did not learn how to ride a bike. And so as I think about the day that I learned how to ride a bike, I have this sense that there was a lot of emotion on my part and on my parents' part that they had been wanting and encouraging me to learn, but I was resistant and refusing. And so on this day, I think that this is what makes the story kind of unique, is that I was just so scared. I was so scared to even try. I didn't trust my dad. I didn't trust my mom. I didn't trust myself. And I just was like, nope, I can't do it. I am not capable of that. That is too hard for me. I'll get hurt, like whatever. I know I was scared of getting hurt. It just seemed too scary. So on the specific day when I did learn how to ride my bike, I was 7. It was summer. So it was sometime after my birthday in the summer. And my parents, I think, had been talking to me about, hey, let's go learn how to ride your bike. Let's give it a try. And I was like, no, I can't do it. And my little sister, so we're 2 years apart. So she was 5. She was like, I want to learn how to ride a bike. And I remember feeling kind of like, you can't do it, right? Like a little bit of like a chip on my shoulder. Like if I can't do it and I'm the big sister, then you can't do it. And my dad said, okay, I'll teach you. And I was like, what? No, she can't learn. Right. There may have been a little bit of competition between us. And here's another thing is we both had bikes. So even though we didn't know how to ride a bike yet, we both had bikes. I remember mine was a red BMX. I think it was probably a boy's bike, but man, I loved that bike. And so I'm sitting there actually on my bike in the parking lot of the state park that's in the town I grew up in. And I would kind of, what's the name of those bikes now that they have that don't have any pedals, but you just like scoot around on them? I forget the name of them. Anyway, I would use my bike like that. I wouldn't try to pedal. That was too scary. And I for sure couldn't do that. But I would just kind of like scoot around on my bike, but I wasn't really riding my bike. And the only place we ever took my bike was this parking lot. And so I was kind of like, no, I don't want my sister to learn. But my sister was always very courageous and she would just try things. And I was the opposite of that, clearly. And so I'm sitting there in the parking lot on my bike, watching my dad teach my little sister how to ride a bike and feeling a little bit resentful, feeling a little bit jealous, feeling a little bit upset, angry, maybe. And it took her like 5 minutes to learn how to ride a bike. At least that's what my memory says. Maybe it was longer than that, but I feel like it was pretty quickly. She just like got on the bike. My dad held his hand, held her up for a while and then let go. And then she was pedaling. And I watched the whole thing. I have a sense that my mom was standing there with me. And then I went, oh, is that it? Well, I can do that. And then I just started riding my bike. Okay. So do you guys hear the metaphor in this? That sometimes, well, and let me say this other thing first. After the fact, after I saw how easy it was for my sister to learn, and then I like dropped all my fear and my resistance and went, oh, is that it? Well, then I can do that. And I literally started riding my bike that day. So my sister and I both learned how to ride our bikes on the same day. I had so much shame. Like I was so ashamed and embarrassed that this thing that only took me a few minutes to learn how to do, I had been resisting and afraid of it for probably like 2 years, maybe longer. And I felt so bad. I felt so weak and like, I don't even know what the word is really. I felt it just shame is the word. I felt so ashamed of myself. And so here's the metaphor, right? Like in my life, I often do this. I often have something I want to do. I mean, it could be a goal that I set or something. And then I tell myself, I can't, I'm not capable. I'll get hurt. It will be painful. I shouldn't even try. Like I go through this whole thing of resistance and fear. And I just want you to know that it's not that the fear wasn't real. The fear was totally real. Like I was really afraid of getting hurt on my bike. But I go through that whole thing before then. What happens is I'll find a mentor or somebody to model the behavior for me. And then I'll be like, oh, is that it? Well, I can do that. And then I just go do it. Right. And so it's kind of like this jump between feeling totally incapable and I think a big part of it too is uncertainty around what is actually required. And then once I actually figure out what is really required, then I'm like, oh, I can do that. So I jumped directly from incapable to capable just with somebody modeling or some knowledge. But I resist and fear even figuring out, what is needed. And so even as I'm talking about this, I'm seeing how this is showing up in my business of like, I dwell on these things and I let my worry and my fear and my resistance kind of take over my mind on goals or like, I wonder how you do this thing. A lot of it has to do with tech. And I don't actually sit down and Google how to do this thing, right? I actually became a VA for one of my coaches because I knew that if I worked for someone else, I would have to drop the fear around figuring out the tech and that I would do it for someone else. Like if I was working for someone else, I would just figure it out and there wouldn't be as much resistance or fear. I would just be like, okay, well, I have to figure this out. So let's figure it out. But for myself in my own business, I can put it off and procrastinate and, come up with a million excuses of why I shouldn't just sit down and, contact either Google or YouTube or contact the help desk. Right. And it's because of all of my fear around, I don't understand. And here's the thing that I really think it is over identifying with our emotion. So I took that fear and I made it mean that, like, I'm afraid, therefore I'm not capable. I'm afraid, therefore I can't do it. Right. I'm not the kind of person who, because I'm feeling this emotion. And I've been thinking about this lately. And one thing I've learned is that if I'm hungry, I don't feel those hunger pangs or maybe thirst. I don't like feel thirsty and then go, oh, I'm thirsty. This means I'm a terrible person, right? I don't over identify myself with bodily sensations like thirst and hunger, hot, cold. Like I don't say, oh my gosh, I'm always cold, which is true. I'm always cold. And make it mean that, like, I'm somehow wrong or stupid or, whatever, incapable of doing a thing because I'm always cold. I'm just like, yeah, I'm always cold. This is how my body functions. I don't make it mean anything about what I can or can't do. I might make it mean like I don't like to go out in the snow, right? Like preferences. But what I noticed as I was reflecting on this story is that as that fearful, anxious kid, I was taking my emotion that I was afraid to learn how to ride a bike, and I was making it mean that I couldn't ride a bike. Right. And there's the saying, be afraid and do it anyway. Right. Like it's not that we're trying to get rid of the fear, it's that we're trying to take action despite the fear. Right. And I can see this in so many different areas of my life that I get all up in my head and I get worried or I get afraid or resistant for whatever reason. And instead of just figuring out, well, what is actually required? What would this take? I procrastinate. Right. And then I realized once I learned how to ride a bike, I really, really enjoyed it. Riding a bike was one of my favorite activities of my childhood. We always had bikes. It was like the one thing that, like, we didn't have trampolines. We didn't have neighbors living in the middle of nowhere. We didn't have the latest gadgets and, toys or whatever. We didn't even have like name brand clothes, but we always had a bike that worked and functioned, which is sometimes more than I could say about our cars. And I think it's because my parents like wanted us to be outside playing, and it was like something we would do on our own without wanting them. My parents never had bikes. I just think that's so fascinating. So being on a bike and biking around is kind of a big part of my childhood and growing up years, even up until I got my driver's license. In fact, I was on my bike, biking around the town I grew up in on my 16th birthday, and I crashed and I sprained my elbow on my 16th birthday. And I was scheduled to take my driver's test in the afternoon. And because I sprained my right elbow and we had a stick shift, I couldn't take my driver's test. I had to postpone it a couple of weeks until my elbow healed. So, I mean, that's what we did before I had friends that could drive. And I just remember, I remember being in probably third grade. So I was probably 9 years old-ish at the time. And I had a friend, my best friend at the time, didn't live too far away from me. It was a few miles away, but she was like one of the closest neighbors. And my mom would let me bike to her house, and I would go to her house and we would hang out, and her mom would let us watch MTV and right. We were like preteens, and it was like so fun. It was this sense of freedom of like, oh my gosh, I'm so grown up. I get to ride my bike. And, like my sister doesn't get to come with me. And like I was on my own. And I just remember, especially in the summer times, riding my bike on these dirt roads. And, sometimes there were rocks in the middle of the roads that didn't come out. Like they would occasionally grade the roads, but if there was a bigger rock, you would just kind of drive around it or whatever. And I would use those rocks as like jumps. I would jump off of them and go airborne. And one time, our property where we lived was sloped. And so we had this driveway that kind of came up from a flat area. The road was flat and it came up and slightly curved around and was like a slight uphill. And my cousin, who was 3 years younger than me and lived on the property as well, he was going up the driveway as far as he could, where it was quite a bit higher. And he was riding his bike down the driveway. And then he had made this jump with a piece of plywood and a log that was split in half. Like the plywood was nailed onto the log, onto the flat side of the log. And it was like a little jump, right? I mean, it was only like, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches tall, but coming down from this hill, this uphill down, he would get going pretty well. And then he would go over the jump and he would get airborne like a few feet in the air. And then he would land and go back down the driveway down to where it was flat and then do it over again. And one day, okay, again, here's the pattern. I was watching him. I'm 3 years older than him and he's having so much fun doing this. And I'm like, yeah, that looks like fun, but I think, I would get hurt. I shouldn't do that. Like, I can't do that. And then I went, no, I'm going to try it. Like if I do it once and it's too scary, then I won't do it again. So I tried it and it was fun and I landed and I didn't get hurt. And so then both of us were doing it. And then I got a little too carried away. I got going a little too fast. I got a little too much air under myself and the bike turned in the air so that my left knee, like instead of, I don't know exactly what happened actually, but somehow I went off that jump and then the bike turned and instead of landing on my tires, I landed on my left knee. And it was pretty bad. I mean, I still have a scar that's probably about the size of a nickel. And I remember sitting there on the ground and just like seeing all this dirt and blood coming out of my knee and screaming. And my mom comes out and she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was just like screaming and crying, like my knee, my knee. And she had to kind of like pick out all these pretty big pebbles from my knee and like before we could clean it out and it just hurt so bad. And so then I was like, I'm never doing that again. So it's definitely this fear of being hurt that stops me. And, when I was a kid, I think it was this physical pain, but now as an adult, I mean, I'm pretty careful as an adult. I don't put myself in positions where I can get hurt all that much. I'm pretty careful, like in the kitchen and things like that. But now it has morphed into this emotional pain, right? Like when I think about my goals and things like that, like, oh, I don't want to feel disappointment. I don't want to, feel the judgment or the shame or, rejection from my family or something like that. Right. And so I avoid doing the things that I really want to do because I think somehow it's going to create some pain. Okay. That's what I got for you today. Would you fill out a survey for me? The link is in the show notes, or you can go to my website, danitabrummer.com/podcast. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit.